Chapter 8.5, The Big Picture. This chapter was inserted after the book was finished. I could have added it to the end, but it's most appropriate here because of the people I talked to. I'll tell you how this happened in a few paragraphs. It was definitely a God thing. I interviewed many people for this book. When I called Bill McCullough, who you will hear about much later in Chapter 18 in a story completely unrelated to rodeo, I was surprised to learn that Bill knew my uncle in the 1970s. Bill told me, "Heather, your family was always so nice to me, your Uncle Jack in particular, and I will never forget that." He said, "Many years ago, I was the rodeo coach at Fresno State. I was a nobody, and your uncle was a big deal and had many friends who were much more important than me. He would always take the time to help me and talk to the kids on the rodeo team. He inspired them to achieve their dreams." Emmy Award winner Clint Pulver is quoted as saying, "There's a difference between being the best in the world and being the best for the world." I'm proud to say that my Uncle Jack is both. My parents understood what was important. They knew that you were not going to take your gold buckles with you to heaven. God doesn't care about the buckles or awards or how much money you have. He cares about who you are inside. What I learned from my family and all the other legends in this book is to treat everyone equally. Be kind to everyone and do not be impressed by wealth. Judge a person by what's in their heart, not their wallet. It all started with my Grandpa Roddy and the quote from Abraham Lincoln that said, "God must have loved the plain people because he made so many of them." After I wrote this book, I thought, I know how Bill feels. I'm a nobody too. I have this great story to tell, but I don't travel in the same circles as my parents anymore. I have no contacts, no clout. I knew I needed someone influential to endorse this book, someone who had a platform and already had a relationship with the audience I wanted to reach. But I felt it was impossible because the book's publication date was already set and there wasn't enough time for me to find someone. I thought, all right, I'm just going to trust God. My mom said everything will work out. It always does. If this book only sells a few copies and one person's life gets touched by these stories, it'll all be worth it. A week before this book was to be published, there was a technical problem and the date would have to be pushed back a few weeks. What? But I had worked so hard on this and had overcome roadblock after roadblock to meet the deadline. I was so upset. I was sitting in church and supposed to be paying attention to the sermon, but my mind was wandering. I was feeling sorry for myself and thinking about all my troubles. And then I started talking to myself in my head. "Heather, snap out of it. This is not a big deal. You have faced bigger problems than this before." That's how you know when you are nuts. You start having conversations with yourself and you argue back. I ignored the voices in my head and said, "What will be, will be. Don't worry, it's all going to work out." Then an idea popped into my head. Wonder where that came from. Thank you, God. I thought, since the book is delayed, I have time now that I didn't have before. I should shoot for the stars and ask the biggest names I can think of for an endorsement. My parents told me, it never hurts to ask. He or she can always say no, but you won't know until you try. I went home and wrote a letter to the names that popped into my head. Bob Tallman and Pat Pirelli. It had been 25 years since the last time I talked with Bob Tallman at a rodeo, for a whopping 5 minutes. And before that, it was over 20 years since I saw him, but he was always so nice to me. I had never even met Pat Pirelli, but I knew that he and my dad were on the same wavelength and had known each other like 40 or 50 years ago. I thought, what the heck? It's worth a shot. A smart person would have been intimidated. Bob Tallman has won the PRCA Rodeo Announcer of the Year 13 times and has been inducted into 15 Halls of Fame. Pat Pirelli coined the term natural horsemanship, and his program is taught in 76 countries. Both of them are extremely busy and certainly don't have time to do a favor for a nobody like me. Because of my parents and their reputation, both Bob and Pat called me back and without any hesitation said they would help me in any way they could. I deeply appreciate them telling their story, and now I get to share it with you. Bob tells his story of how he got his start.
Now, folks, you got to understand, I attribute my success to people that helped mold my life and have impacted it in so many ways. Uncle Jack Roddy, Jack Sparrow, the cowboy hero, Bob Cook took me in when nobody else would hire me. Marion Sharp took me in and my family, and my partner, that's what he called me, Nolan Sharp, partner. We were team open partners. There are many other people that helped me become successful, but they were the reason for my start. I was just a kid from Winnemucca, Nevada. Didn't have a pot to piss in. Wasn't even worried about what window I was going to throw it out. Now, it all started on February 3rd, 1972, and I moved to Clements, California in a half-ton blue Ford pickup with a camper on the back. Mom, my wife, Kristen, stayed at home, had a job, so we could pay the other bills. The people we met, they took us under their wing, introduced us to their circle of champions, and then they championed me. Nolan and Marion were unbelievable, so kind to us. I remember parking our camper at their house and plugging into the barn. I'd go on veterinary calls with Dr. Sharp, Nolan, my partner, and rolled beer kegs into the longest bar in the world in San Francisco for Grandpa John Roddy and Jack Roddy. You know, after Nicole, my daughter, was born, we would leave our daughter with a diaper bag with Aunt Marion, and she would keep her 2, 3, 4 days at a time as we tried to make our mark on the world. I got my start as a rodeo announcer because of the legends in this book. I can't begin to tell you how important my relationship with Jack Sparrick was. He lobbied for me. I think maybe when Bob Cook and Jack Roddy said, I don't know about this skinny kid from Nevada, but we could give him a start. Jack Sparrick, he said, he's a cowboy. I trust him. This was a God wink before it was even a term that we use today. I was about 23, 4 years old, just a cowboy from Nevada, drove a truck for the rodeo company, built arenas, and took care of the stock as well. Because I was 5 years older than my buddy Pat Pirelli, still a great friend today, I could drive the trucks, haul the livestock, he'd hose them out. We were hauling rodeo stock to Clovis, California for the Fresno State College Rodeo. The announcer couldn't get there, and at the last minute, Cook yelled at me and said, hey, you're a little wild, you're completely crazy, but I know you're not afraid. Put on a clean shirt, entertain us, go announce the rodeo. As I mentioned a moment ago, I call Nolan my partner because I rode his horses, his saddles, used his ropes, and I could rope pretty good. But I was impressive enough that Nolan said, let's go enter. I think he probably paid all the entry fees, and if we won something, he let me keep my part of it. Whether I turned 2 or 10, whether he roped 1 foot or 2, we were partners, and we had fun. As they say, it's not about the destination. It's about the journey and who helped you travel on this road. You know, folks, we came from humble beginnings and are now successful. My voice, it is a gift from God. And I don't forget where my riches came from. We were blessed by knowing the people that you'll read about in this book. And now we're able to pay it forward and bless others. Kristen and I, well, we've taken care of others in the rodeo industry. Rodeo cowboys, bullfighters, clowns, team ropers that didn't have family at Christmas, New Year's. Maybe it could be Easter, Thanksgiving. Our table always has room for one of those that might be straggling at the moment. Nolan and Marion, they treated us like family. And you know, it's the kindness and the trust that we were given that we now can extend to others.
Wow, that is so beautiful. I want that written on my tombstone. That is a great illustration of dropping a pebble into a lake and having no idea of the ripple effect that will occur and who will be affected by your actions. Those ripples will create waves, and the next thing you know, there's a tsunami. My parents and the other legends helped Bob and his family because it was the right thing to do. They weren't nice because they were trying to work an angle to make themselves look better. Because of my parents' kindness, People that Mom and Dad would never ever meet, like the cowboys sitting at Tallman's table during the holidays, are the very ones that are benefiting. That is a beautiful thing. And my parents will never know that happened. Years from now, they will still be affecting people. We all will. Whether our actions are good or bad, will be affecting people for a very long time. When we die, the big picture will be revealed to us, as my dad said, El Foto Grande, and we will be able to connect the dots. But until then, we may not know how our kindness affects others. We should just keep doing what we're doing. You might not get rewarded immediately, but you will get rewarded in heaven. I admit, I'm fearful. I'm worried about the future of our country. I watch the news and I'm depressed about where we're headed. Things are bad. I wonder if the ship is taking on too much water and we're going to sink. Or will we be able to turn things around? When I get worried, I just remember what Mother Teresa once said. I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters and create many ripples. I have to have faith that our pebbles will create a tsunami and we will right the ship. The pendulum is going to swing back. It has to. Bob mentioned his friend Pat Pirelli. You'll hear from Pat next about the influences and mentors in his life. He went from hosing out a cattle truck to becoming a bronc rider to having an international following. But he never forgot where he came from and how he got his start. Pat says this about Bob Tallman.
When I was probably 17, and Bob's, I believe, 5 years older from me, and RSC, which they called it rodeo stock contractor, actually was Rowdy Sparrock and Cook. Bob was more the truck driver, and I was the kid that cleaned out the truck and opened chutes and, did all the gopher stuff. And the announcer didn't show up, and Bob Cook hollers, "Bob Tallman, you got a big mouth. Get your butt up here and get on the microphone." So that was the start of it. And I was really starting to win a lot and rode at the Cow Palace and do all that stuff. And so every time when they started getting pro rodeos, Bob Tallman called me the Italian Stallion. So we had a lot of fun times together.
Greatest rodeo announcer of all time. He enhanced everything that happened. Like the old saying that music is nothing but silence between the notes. He knew when not to say something. He never got in the way of the action. That's why he's the greatest.
Pat talks about growing up in the Bay Area and all the people that influenced him.
My parents lived in Pleasanton on Happy Valley Road, and then my grandparents lived in Livermore off of Alcides. So in those days, I was hungry for any kind of knowledge, and just in that area at that time, there was great saddle bronc riders and bareback riders and Raoul Saddlery. He made the first bulldoggers and calf roper saddles. There was a low cantle, and all this stuff was going on. And Livermore at one time was the rodeo cowboy capital of the world, and then became Oakdale. There was so much action going on. I'd watched Dr. Billy Linfoot do wild horse taming at Reed's auction in Hayward. And that's what inspired me to want to become the person that could tame wild horses. And I was 16. I was at the Cow Palace. And I saw John Edwards ride Cheyenne, which was one of the most famous bucking horses at the time. And I go, that's it. That's what I'm going to be, And so even just the Cow Palace itself being an influence, we went in 4-H and then FFA. We went over for almost every single performance for 2 weeks, every year since I was 10 years old, and seeing all of these, wonderful things, not just the rodeo, but the horse shows and all the different kinds, all the English horses and Hackney ponies and all the different breeds in the first week, and then all the Western horses second week, and then Cattleman's Day. And it was just like, oh my gosh, couldn't imagine. You could only imagine trying to be one of those guys that got to do all that special stuff, reach those heights. At that time, between Santa Rosa and Salinas, or Santa Barbara, and say Oakdale to San Francisco, that was the vaqueros. That's where all of that tradition came from. But that was still a strong thing in those days. And, The other day, somebody gave me these Western Horseman magazines dated 1943 and 44. It was in Alamo, I think is where the headquarters was. And so the Western Horseman was actually a Bay Area magazine. So the East Bay Area was really an epicenter for great Western horsemanship. And there was even a guy named Merle Lacey, and he had Arabians. And I saw him playing with those Arabian stallions at Liberty, which then another inspiration that caused me to want to get horses to do things even without a halter, bridle, or saddle on. I've told a lot of people I was born on St. Patrick's Day, and even though I'm Italian, it's the luck of the Irish, because where I was born and the era and the time, I don't think a lot of people realize how important environmental influences and inspiration can be to somebody. We were in a special place. The Salinas Rodeo, the Livermore Rodeo, the Hayward Rodeo. Again, that's from all the influences in the East Bay Area in Central California. Jack Rowdy was still bulldogging back then, and his brother Jimmy was, they had their ranch over there in San Jose below Mount Hamilton. And so it was just infested with great inspiration, great riders, and I was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time and took ambition pills every morning or something and wanted to learn from everything and everybody and all those guys. It's a perfect storm for me. I've always been interested in training animals. I trained my 4-H steer, my sheep, pig. I fiddled around with the chickens, and my dogs always taught them every dang trick in the world. And so when I started rodeo, and I started hanging around with the rodeo clowns, Dale Woodard was one of my best friends. And I started asking them, how do you get a horse or a donkey to do this? Dale had a pig one time called White Rock, because Red Rock was a famous bull at the time. He had this white pig, and he trained that pig to do all these amazing things. So I was really interested in that. Some of them had chimpanzees in their act. Some of them had all these things, roosters and all that kind of stuff. So I would always hang around the specialty acts and find out about, how they did that. And then wherever I was, if I heard there was a, really good horseman, some old guy, I would find a way to get there.
I've got to take a little pause here and share with you how bizarre these last few days of my life have been. God's fingerprints are all over this. I feel like I'm getting a peek at the big picture and able to connect the dots. As a kid, I knew Bob Tallman, but I had never met Pat Pirelli. I did not know that Pat worked for RSC, and I did not know he was friends with Bob. He was just a guy that I saw in magazines, and I knew that he and my dad had worked on the same horses. It wasn't until after Mom died that I realized Mom knew Tootie Bland. The rodeo world is small, but it's not that small. In the 1960s, Mom and Tootie barrel raced together and became friends. If it's even possible, Tootie's outfits were more glitzy and spectacular than Mom's. It would not surprise me if the costume department from the movie The Electric Cowboy got their ideas from these two. All her life, Tootie had a desire to make the lives of horses better. Horses had given her so much, and she wanted to give back. She knew the partnership between horse and human was stronger if it was based on trust rather than fear. She had an idea, a dream really, to use entertainment as a vehicle to show the world what true horsemanship really is. She believed through education she could change people's minds. Her idea was a televised competition between 3 horse trainers who would each choose an untouched, unbroke 3-year-old horse from a group of horses from the historic 4-6s ranch. On the 3rd round, they would ride through an obstacle course. It sounded crazy to everybody at the time. The competitors would wear a wireless mic to tell the audience what they were thinking, and more importantly, teach how to read a horse so the audience could understand what the horse was trying to communicate. The audience would be a part of the journey from the selection of the horse to the final competition and learn that horses respond much faster to a whisper rather than a shout. The competitors would be judged on things like catching, haltering, saddling and groundwork, the competitor's demeanor and ability to build the horse's confidence, and adjust to the colt's needs and build a solid foundation. People told Tootie she had a nice idea, but it would never work. They said, "No one's going to pay to watch this, and giving a horse trainer only 3 sessions is not long enough. There's no way. Just give up. It's not going to work." The experts were wrong. This year, Road to the Horse celebrates 20 years of sold-out crowds, and the winner receives $100,000. Hooray to Tootie for following her dreams. What I didn't know until after Mom died was what Tootie told me. I'll read her email for you now. "There's no telling how many years your mom and I have been friends. She was one of those friends that was always in your corner. I do miss her and all those wonderful years we experienced together. When I started Road to the Horse, most people considered it an impossible endeavor. Your mom and I talked about the positives and negatives, and in the end, she thought it was worth the effort and the challenge. I will always remember her in that special way of a friend that will give you the truth and the right word at the right time." What a great email. Tootie changed many horses' lives, and Mom contributed to that by encouraging her to pursue her dreams. Mom thought anything was possible if you were willing to work hard. It makes me so happy. It proves to all of us that we just don't know the power an encouraging word might have. Mom was also known for telling the truth. She would not tell you what you wanted to hear. She would tell it like it is. If people were offended, well, that's just too bad. She loved the saying, "Suck it up, buttercup." All right, fast forward back to the present day. When I was stressed because of the delays associated with publishing this book, I could hear my mom's voice in my head saying, "Chill out, Heather. Everything will work out. It always does." The book finally came together, and at 8:03 a.m. yesterday, I got an email that it was all systems go. Woohoo! I did a happy dance in my kitchen. Oh, it's finally over. Now I can work on something else. Because I had been putting out fires elsewhere, I had put everything else on the back burner. In 2 weeks, I am going to be the keynote speaker at the Christian women's retreat called Horse Women by Grace. It's at the Jude Ranch called Triangle C, owned by Chris Cox in Wyoming. It's a great problem to have, isn't it? I'm behind on writing a speech, and I get to go on a trail ride in Wyoming. Last year, women came from 10 states, and during the 4-day trail ride, 3 women were baptized in the river at the ranch. Being there changed those ladies' lives, and they went home and affected other people's lives. Let's go back to Tootie Bland for a second. Chris Cox is the only trainer who has won Road to the Horse 4 times. Nobody else has done that. He is truly gifted and a great horseman. Now that the book was off my plate, I switched gears and opened my PowerPoint to work on my speech. Less than 2 hours later, I got an email from the editor saying we hit a snag and it would be delayed yet again. Ugh! I screamed some naughty words. It was so bad that I woke up the dogs and they slinked away to the other room to get away from the crazy lady. I had a little tantrum and then remembered the words my mom said. "Suck it up, buttercup. Don't worry. Be happy." Later that day, the horseshoer, or farrier depending on where you live, came to our farm in Minnesota to trim our horses. I appreciate Steve's work for many reasons. First of all, he's very technically proficient. No hoof, no horse. My horses were never lame because of a bad trim job. For non-horse people, horses' hooves are like our fingernails. They grow out and need to be trimmed every 6 weeks. If the horse only walks on nice soft sand or is a mare out in the field with her foal, the horse can go barefoot. But if the horse is used hard or walks on gravel, they need shoes to protect their tender feet. And the angle is very important. Any woman knows that if you wear flats all week and then high heels on Saturday night, your back hurts. I was holding the horses for Steve while we chatted. I really liked the way he treated the horse. He knows horses are a prey animal rather than a predator, and does not feel safe when his hoof is taken away and the horse can't run. Steve touches the horse at the shoulder, runs his hand down the leg, and waits for the horse to give him his foot rather than grab the ankle and take the foot away from the horse. Steve asked me what I was up to, and I told him about the delay for my book and that I needed to write a speech for a Christian retreat, but I was out here holding horses for you. He said, "Oh, poor Heather. You have big problems. What's your speech about?" I said, "You're right. It's all about perspective and how you look at it." Anyway, the theme of the retreat is finding your purpose. My speech is about how you will never know how your actions affect others, but God knows. He sees the big picture. God is pulling the strings and connecting the dots. I told him I was so stressed that I typed triangle C on my slides instead of triangle C. Because it looked odd, I had to slow down and really look at it. I thought, try, because God is 3 in 1, angels, and C stands for Christ. He said, that's cool. Where is that ranch? I said, it's in Wyoming. It belongs to Chris Cox. He said, Chris Cox is a great guy. I met him this year. He lives in Texas, right? I said, he does, but he summers in Wyoming. I thought, wow, what are the odds that these two would overlap? We live in Minnesota. How did Steve meet Chris? Steve took a swig of water, stretched his back, and picked up the next hoof. He said, Chris came to the International Farrier Summit in Ohio in January. He was a keynote speaker at the big banquet. He said a horse never needs to be sedated or restrained, that the horse has been trained improperly. It's an owner problem, not a horse problem. It's the best speaker we've ever had. I learned so much. And then on the spot, Chris donated to the Injured Farriers Fund and Hammers and Heroes. Steve bent down to pick up the next hoof, and the horse would not budge. With his metal hoof trimmers, Steve went tap, tap, tap on the horse's hoof. And the instant the horse moved, Steve rewarded him and stopped tapping. I asked him, what is Hammers and Heroes? He said, it's a nonprofit that provides therapeutic blacksmithing to military veterans and first responders. Chris donated 2 weekends for 2 of private training to learn how a horse thinks. They put it up for auction, and in less than 4 minutes, it raised $8,000. Wow, what a great story. That's going to be the first part of my speech. God gave Chris a great talent to understand horses. Chris found his purpose. God blessed Chris, but that was a byproduct of God's true intent. It's all a big circle. All the dots are connected. God affected one man, but that one man affected many more people. Chris will never meet the injured farrier that gets to buy his kids' soccer shoes or pay his mortgage payment. He won't know how his actions through Hammers for Heroes have helped a person with PTSD who now has a purpose and has been trained for a vocation. Chris is a humble guy and would not toot his own horn. To him, this is not a big deal. But this is a big deal. Without the delay, I wouldn't have talked to Steve about my, quote, problems, and I would have never known what Chris did and how he blessed others. I just love these stories. And because of the delay, I'm able to put that story in this book. And it's a perfect intro to my speech. I'll post the whole speech on my website. You were right, Mom. It's all going to work out. It always does. That's my new mantra. Don't worry, be happy. Back to my conversation with Pat Pirelli. We talked about how important setting goals is. I told Pat what my parents said. Whatever your mind can conceive, you can achieve. Don't just wish and hope, make it happen. Pat Pirelli talks about how important setting goals and visualizing what you want to achieve is.
I won on one weekend. I won the Cal Poly Rodeo on Friday and Saturday. I won first place, won a belt buckle. And then the next day we drove up to Clements and I won the Clements Rodeo. And both of them had a belt buckle. But it was back in about 73 when the silver went sky high. And all of a sudden, all the belt buckles went from a nice, beautiful size belt buckle to this little bitty belt buckles. And I had won these 2 big rodeos. And I won these 2 little bitty rodeo belt buckles. And I was kind of sad. I'd be kind of like, oh man, just when I finally win belt buckles, they're little bitty things. And then I said to myself, well, someday I'm going to live in Clements and I'm going to have 2 little kids. And that eventually did happen. And Both my kids, my daughter's 42, my son's 40, they both have those belt buckles.
Pat talked about all the people that influenced his life: world champion bronc rider Johnny Hawkins, great horsemen like Ray Hunt, Tom Dorrance, Dr. Billy Linfoot, Freddie Ferreira, Troy Henry, and others, including my dear old dad.
I believe in the laws of attraction, so I've always been attracted to and try to attract people that have got good core values. And for example, your dad was not just a top level veterinarian. He was a champion in life. And that's the kind of thing that to me is more important. Same thing with Johnny Hawkins. He wasn't just a world champion. He was a champion in life. And people would say, when I grow up, I want to be like Johnny Hawkins. Dad is being one of those, I call them 1%ers. If you want to soar like an eagle, don't fly with turkeys. In other words, everybody he ever introduced me to, Jack Rowdy introduced me to, they were all top level people. And that's where that circle of eagles fly around the top of the mountain. And I think that's really part of the special thing that not only your dad was, but the circle of influence. It influenced me to want to only learn from the best and forget the rest. We had some interactions on horses and horses that had some challenges, and being able to handle horses that didn't behave the way we wanted them to. We started, talking about how horses feel, think, act, and play. And at that time, he recommended that some people send their horse to me and that sort of thing. And then that's where I kind of got my start with all these thoughts. And so we just had this relationship of, I guess, mutual respect. Him as a veterinarian that was more than just a, push the buttons kind of veterinarian, but one that really had a lot of compassion and that sort of thing.
Oh, so nice to hear. And it happens to be Father's Day the day I'm taping this. Wow. So let's rewind a few years and hear a story about a horse that was in our family. I knew all the other stories in this book by heart because I told them so often, but I had completely forgotten about this until Pat reminded me, and then I called Brian to get the rest of the story. I was not around in the late 1980s because, as you will find out in a few chapters, I was off doing my own thing and on the outs with my mom. In 1976, my grandpa John Roddy bred his good mare to the stallion Son of Sugar, and she had a foal. They chose the innovative and highly unusual name of Sonny for the horse by Son of Sugar. This was because we already had a horse named Sugar. My family was busy doing other stuff. They didn't spend time thinking up creative names for the horses. They named their own horse Roni and the sorrel horse Red. We had a Blackie and a Brownie. Over the years, we had more than one Brownie, but never at the same time. They loved sugar bars and drifted horses. We had 3 horses named Sugar and 2 named Drifter. Then Dad really stretched his imagination and cleverly named his gray horse Blue and our other horse Red. But the name Red was really confusing because we already had a horse by that name, and this new horse was really brown. Oh, and let's not forget the highly inventive and unconventional name of TC, which was short for the Colt. I know, I shouldn't make fun of the dead, but I can't help it. I just have to tell you one more thing. Dad bragged that he was fluent in Spanish and could talk to horses just like Dr. Dolittle. In addition to his El Foto Grande comment, when a new client would bring their horse to Dad, he'd look into the horse's eyes and ask, "¿Cómo está, frijole caballo?" The owner would have a puzzled look on their face, and Dad would explain, "I just asked him, 'How you been, horse?'" That's my dad. Anyway, despite his boring name, Sonny was a great horse with natural talent. He was a stallion until he was 5 and had an attitude. He wasn't mean. He was just very impressed with himself and knew that he was gorgeous. He had confidence out the wazoo. That horse had heart. He was something else. Jack Roddy's family broke Sonny and did it the right way. Sonny was a handful. They were partners with him rather than try to show him who's boss. He was a smart horse and took all of their skills to walk the fine line to harness his energy and still keep the fire lit in his belly. In the old days of the Wild West, breaking a horse meant the cowboy roped the horse, tied him down, and stood on top of him. Then the cowboy would blindfold the horse, put a halter and saddle on, mount up, rip the blindfold off, and let her buck. A broke horse often meant the horse had a broken spirit. Thank goodness we've come a long way since then. I got to ride Sonny in the cutting at the National High School Rodeo Finals in 1985. I stayed out of his way and let him dazzle the judges with his talent. He won third in the nation. When I graduated from high school, Sonny became a healing horse for my brother Brian, and the two of them really gelled. Brian had the same demeanor as Dad and goes with the flow. He did not get in Sonny's way or tell him what to do. Sonny was a superstar and put Brian in the right place every time. Brian and Sonny would lay down some smoke and fast run, and Brian, who was usually quiet, would whoop and pump his fist, and Sonny would shake his head, snort, and flip his long flaxen hair out of his eyes. As Brian would coil the rope, Sonny would put his ears forward and look at all of his adoring fans in the grandstand. Sonny was just sure that the audience was cheering for him. It didn't happen often, but you could tell that Sonny got mad if Brian missed. In the team roping, the team can use a total of 3 loops. If Brian missed, Sonny was done. He would not give him another shot. Sonny would stand there like a statue and flick his tail up and down. This was Sonny's way of flipping Brian off or telling the header that he didn't handle the steer correctly. Thankfully, Brian hardly missed. Brian had another horse that he also loved. He had a white calf roping horse named Casper. Casper came to us with that name. If we had raised him from a baby, I'm sure we would have named him something exotic like Whitey. Tragically, Casper got lame and had to be put down. Even the world's greatest veterinarian couldn't help him. Dad felt terrible. Brian was devastated. Mom knew how he felt because her horse Chongo had died unexpectedly. The high school rodeo finals was coming up, and Brian didn't have a calf horse. It was 1986. Sonny was 10 years old, in his prime, and he and Brian got along well. My parents said, "Sonny is the perfect size and has explosive speed. He's a genius. That horse can do anything." So they sent Sonny to a calf roping horse trainer. Sonny caught on quickly and would stop on a dime, but he refused to back up. Sonny felt backing up and holding the rope was beneath him. It wasn't his idea, and it wasn't something he wanted to do. He would not budge. Sonny and the trainer did not get along. Sonny was an alpha and used to being in charge. Apparently, the trainer had not yet read the book by Tom Dorrance that said, "Don't fight with your horse. Make the wrong thing difficult and the right thing easy." The trainer was going to make Sonny submit. He had tried every mechanical device he could think of to make Sonny back up. Sonny was flicking his tail up and down and had his ears back. Every muscle in his body was clenched, and he stood like a statue. If Sonny could have talked, he would have said, "Nope, not gonna do it. If you keep pushing me, I'm gonna get really mad, and then we're all gonna be sorry." The trainer called and wanted permission to use a shock collar. Brian immediately said no and brought Sonny home. It's only now that I write this that I realize how unselfish this was. Brian could have said that he wanted to win at all costs. Brian was in the lead for the year and had enough points that all he needed to do was have a clean run at the finals. Brian would end up in first place and win the buckle. He could toss Sonny aside after Sonny served his purpose. Brian did the right thing and brought Sonny home. I'd like to tell you that I would have done the same thing, but I'm not sure that I would have had that wisdom at that age. I was pretty selfish. I was the equivalent of Sonny in the human world, except Sonny was a lot better looking and much more talented. Sonny had won and got his way, but now he was standing in his pen with nothing to do. Sonny was depressed, and so was Brian. My folks were at a loss for what to do. Brian and Sonny got along great when they team roped together. They were in sync. Now Brian only had 2 weeks to find another calf horse before the finals, And even if they were able to find a new horse, there would not be enough time for Brian and the horse to become one and trust each other. Mom and Dad just knew there had to be a solution for this. Don't give up. Think outside the box. Ding! A light bulb went off in Dad's head. Pat Pirelli. Pat had moved from Livermore to Clements, and it had been many years since Dad had seen him. Pat was a big deal by then. He could have easily tossed the little people aside because he was flying around in private jets and doing demonstrations for Ronald Reagan, Casey Tibbs, and even the Queen of England. Dad called Pat, and it was like no time had passed. Pat did Dad a favor, made room for Sonny in his program, and said he would personally work with Horse and Brian. Pat tells the rest of the story.
Your dad and Brian came over to Clements when I had moved up there. Your brother Brian had a horse that was a really good horse, but he wouldn't back up after he roped a calf. Brian came and spent a week with me there in Clements. And of course, your dad came up several times. I taught him how to teach the horse to back up by wiggling the lead rope at him and that sort of thing instead of putting on a mechanical things. And I just taught him how to back the horse into the stall, just teaching him to back up whenever you kind of looked at him. And then Brian and I would practice him cantering around my arena, which I had bought from the Camarillos and Bob Tallman, and step off and then just go down the rope. They pretend like he'd roped a calf and then just step down and shake the rope at him. Anyway, one thing lead to another. After a week, and then I guess about a week later, they went and he ended up winning the high school finals.
That week was life-changing for Sonny. Before Sonny went to Pat's, he was about to be irretrievably ruined by a trainer that did not understand how to motivate a horse. The trainer would have broken his spirit, and Sonny would have never forgotten the anger he felt towards the rider. Sonny was a part of our family. There was no question we would have kept him, even if he became damaged goods. Without Brian making the right call and the intervention from Pat Pirelli, Sonny would have been miserable. Not just for being shocked with a dog collar, but miserable for the rest of his life. He would have been standing in his pen all alone, with nothing to do. Angry that he had been bossed around, angry that a new horse had taken his place and he couldn't do what he loved. He would be angry at everything and not understand what happened and why no one is riding him anymore. Thank you, God, that story had a happy ending. Brian took Sonny to Cal Poly and made it into the top 10 at the College Rodeo Finals in Bozeman, Montana in 1992. Sonny was a member of our family until he died at 32 years old. 4 generations had enjoyed that horse. My grandpa had Sonny until he was 4 and then gave him to Jack. And then Brian and I rode him, and finally Brian's kids. The horse that was known to be a handful and had an attitude was now babysitting great-grandkids. My mom was a pretty good barrel horse trainer. She said, just stay out of your horse's way. Let them think. That's the same thing Pat Pirelli said about Bob Tallman. He said, he's so great because he stays out of the way. He lets the magic happen. Mom said, don't try to control every step your horse makes. Train them right and trust them to do the right thing. They will figure it out. A person that picks, or nags is going to make their horse numb, and the horse won't be responsive. Or a person who tries to bribe their horse with treats or oats will create an unruly horse that walks all over them. A horse like that will take advantage of the very hand that feeds them. Some people think they're going to show the horse who's boss. They whip and beat the horse and expect compliance and obedience. But what they get is a horse that shuts down because it's fearful. Or the rider causes it to get defensive and protect itself. Now the horse is ready to fight, and horses never forget. Now do me a favor and rewind 2 minutes and replace the word horse with the word child. That's right. I said it. All kids are animals. No, I'm just kidding. But you will learn a lot if you apply the same principles of training horses to raising kids. What my dad knew, and we learned from watching people like Chris Cox and Pat Pirelli work with horses, is it's all about trust and respect. We learned you can't make an 1,100-pound horse do what you want any more than you can make a 16-year-old kid do it your way. It has to be their idea. A horse and a kid need to have confidence that you will not put them at risk. For the horse, it's all about safety. For a kid, it's all about trust and respect. Theodore Roosevelt said, "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." You can't demand trust and respect. You have to earn it. You have to be consistent because horses and kids are crafty little buggers and they will sense a weakness and have an uncanny ability to get what they want. Don't be harsh, but be firm. Don't weaken and don't take a shortcut. Mom knew how to train a horse, but I'm old. Back in the Stone Ages, she didn't know that she could apply the same principles to raising kids. I was an alpha. I was not going to be bribed. I didn't want to be told what to do, and I wasn't going to do anything unless it was my idea. Just like Sonny, I was a handful, and I was hard to train.